everyone, welcome back to another video. Today I wanted to talk to you all about the books that I read in January. January was quite a tough month for a variety of reasons. It mainly has to do with school, and I was in a really big reading slump for the majority of the month. But towards the end of the month, I started to feel like I was coming out of it, and that has mainly to do with the fact that I read a lot of picture books the last few days of January, and I'm really excited to share them. But I'm first going to share my DNFs, and then I'll share the books that I read for a couple different readathons and reading challenges that started in January, and some of them are ongoing. But yeah, I'm really excited to talk about each of the books, but first let's go over the DNFs. This first DNF is temporary, and I definitely want to read this book. I just felt like it was making my reading slump worse, and I decided to put it aside and try it at another time, and that is Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. This book just required a lot more of my focus than I was able to give when I tried to read it, and so I decided rather than trying to read it and potentially not enjoying it because of this reading slump, I'm just going to try it at another time. So this is my first DNF. I also DNF'd The Ice Swan by Janelle Chizelski, I think is how you pronounce her last name. This one was very, very disappointing. I just wasn't jiving with the writing style. I found the characters to be quite annoying and just not realistic, and it just felt very stereotypical, and there were some aspects of the story that didn't make sense. And this is historical fiction. It takes place around the time of the Russian Revolution, and there were just a couple things that didn't quite make sense to me. I looked into a couple things as well, and they just weren't as historically accurate, and things like that do bother me if I am more familiar with that time period that I'm reading about. So this one just wasn't doing it for me, unfortunately, so it is a permanent DNF. My next DNF is Mistress of Rome by Kate Quinn, and I'm really, really sad about this book. I was hoping to love it, and I was actually hoping to read it for the Around the World in 80 Days readathon that I'm hosting with a couple friends on BookTube, and it was just giving me the ick. I was extremely uncomfortable while reading it. I listened to about an hour of the audiobook, and I disliked every single character. And I'm not normally bothered by that. I can normally read a book if it has certain aspects that keep me interested, even if the characters are not likable. A perfect example is Wuthering Heights. I love that book for the writing and for the atmosphere that the author creates, but the characters are so unlikable. Whereas with this book, the characters are unlikable, the writing was okay, just nothing kept me interested at all. There is also a trigger for self-harm in this book, and I am not typically bothered by a lot of triggers, but that's just one thing that I don't like to read about, so it's another reason that I decided to put this book down. This next DNF makes me so sad. And I know there are going to be a few of you who may not be so happy when you see this on my DNF list, but unfortunately I DNF'd The Winter Sea by Susanna Kearsley, and I am still so heartbroken about this book. I almost entered another massive reading slump because of this book. I read more than half of the book. I got past the 50% mark, and I just couldn't do it anymore. It was way too slow. And I was actually buddy reading this with Mitzi, and we had very similar feelings. It felt like the characters weren't doing anything. Regardless of the fact that I normally enjoy slower books, if the characters are interesting, none of that mattered because this book was just so boring and so slow and nothing was happening. Mitzi actually finished the book, and we talked a little bit about what happens towards the end, and I just didn't care anymore. I am so sorry if this is one of your favorite books. I still want to read more Susanna Kearsley. I loved The Shadowy Horses by her, but this one just didn't do it for me. Okay, and my fifth and last DNF, and this one I technically DNF'd the first or second day of February, but I started it in January, and that is Eternal by Lisa Scottoline. It was okay. When I first started it, I was interested, but it became apparent that the entire plot would be hinging on a love triangle between teenagers, which is one of my least favorite things on planet Earth. So yeah, this isn't just not for me. I'm not going to force myself to read a book with a trope that I really don't like. So this one unfortunately is also a DNF. All right, so now going through the books that I actually did finish in January, I'm first going to talk about the Read in the New Year readathon that was hosted by Oshina and Holly. And this readathon was a really interesting one because it was during the first week of January, and all the prompts were based on New Year's resolutions, which I thought was really fun. So the first prompt was lose weight, read a book under 250 pages, and for that I read Russian Tales, and this is just a collection of Russian fairy tales, and it was a very interesting mix. Some of them were quite dark, some of them were very, very light and fun. And overall, I enjoyed this. I ended up giving it about a 3 stars, and it's just because some of the stories I found to be very boring and weird, and some of them I found to be okay, but there were only a couple that I really, really enjoyed. And this collection really felt like the Brothers Grimm fairy tale style, and I'm coming to realize more and more that I am a fairy tale retelling kind of person, much more than an original fairy tale kind of person. I just tend to enjoy retellings much more, and maybe it has to do with the writing, the way that these stories were told and the way that these tales were told. So yeah, I overall enjoyed this. I thought it was very interesting, and the illustrations were stunning. I'll just show you a couple. Some very beautiful ones. This one was quite unsettling. I did overall enjoy this, and I'm glad that I read it. The next prompt is eat healthy, read a book that has food as part of the story or on the cover. And for that, I read The Little Women Cookbook, and this was put together by Winnie Morinville. And this was really, really sweet. It has some amazing recipes, and it also has little sections that kind of go into what recipes go with what kind of meal. So tea time, picnics, dinner, just different meal times. And there's just an example. Yeah, I just think this is such a cute cookbook, and I gave this 5 stars. The next prompt was to drink more water, read a book that has water on the cover or in the title. And for that, I read Set the Stars Alight by Amanda Dykes, and you can see it has water on the cover. Wow, this book was amazing. I gave it 5 stars, and I just can't get enough of Amanda Dykes. I can't get enough of her writing, and I just need to read her newest release. But this book was beautiful. It was so poetic, beautifully written, and the story really, really tugged at my heartstrings. I am just in love. I feel like the less you know about the plot going in, the more impactful the story will be. It's definitely a harder one to describe and to summarize without giving too much away. But this is dual timeline in a way, because we have our modern day and then we have the historical timeline. But the modern day starts a little earlier when our main characters are children, and then the rest of the story is from their perspective as adults. So the modern timeline, we have Lucy and Dash, and they are childhood friends. They grew up together, and Lucy has this fascination with the sea and with this legendary lost ship, and Dash ends up becoming an astronomer. They're both very intelligent kids, and they both went through some pretty difficult things as kids, and so they just have this very, very special bond. And then in our historical timeline, we're learning about these characters, and they have to do with this legendary lost ship that Lucy and Dash are, I guess, studying. And so we get both perspectives, and the historical timeline is the early 19th century, if I'm not mistaken. This book also takes place in England. It takes place in Sussex on the coast. It's just such a beautiful story, and I know Amanda Dykes is not for everyone. Her writing is very flowery, and it tends to create a slower plot. Her stories are very character-driven, but it's just such a beautiful story and a very unique one, a very unique historical fiction. It's very atmospheric and whimsical and just so beautiful. I would highly recommend this book. 5 big stars. The fourth prompt was social media detox. Read a book set in the past or historical fiction, and a few of the books that I read for this readathon definitely work for that, but I'm just going to count Set the Stars Alight for that prompt. The fifth prompt is make a new friend, read a new to you author. So for that, definitely Russian Tales counts, as well as this cookbook. The sixth prompt is to exercise more, read a book in a series. And for that, I reread one of my favorite stories of all time, To Whisper Her Name by Tamara Alexander. This was a buddy read with my friend from Bookstagram, and I'll leave her Bookstagram linked below. And this was a reread for the both of us, and we both fell in love with it. I think she initially gave it 4 stars the first time she read it, and then she ended up giving it 5 stars the second time around. And I went in not expecting to love it as much as I did the first time I read it. I thought for sure, because I read it as a teenager for the first time, I had a different perspective. I wouldn't like it as much the second time around, but I loved this book so much. Oh my gosh, I just can't get enough of the story, and I just want to start it again. I want to reread it right now. So this book is set right after the American Civil War has ended, and it's set on a plantation in Tennessee. It's called Belle Meade Plantation, and at the time this was a very huge thoroughbred farm. The owners of this plantation were real people, so I found that to be very, very interesting. They were very, very interesting characters to read about, but our main characters are Olivia and Ridley, and they are literally 2 of my favorite characters of all time. I couldn't get enough of them in this book. So our main character, Olivia, she's basically a widow. Her first husband was killed because he ended up being a traitor to the South, and she is basically shunned from society. As a result of this, Olivia is invited to Belmead Plantation by Elizabeth, who is the wife of the plantation's owner. And Elizabeth was very good friends with Olivia's mother, and so she invites her to live there as, I guess, like a housekeeper. And then we have Ridley, who was from the South, but he decided to fight with the North, with the Union Army, and that had a lot of consequences for him. And so Ridley ends up looking for a job on this plantation. He meets Olivia, and the story goes from there. This story was just so beautifully written. I adore Tamara Alexander's writing style. It is so immersive, and I truly felt like I was on this farm in Tennessee. It was just beautiful and so tangible. Ridley is also one of my favorite male love interests that I have ever read. He is just perfection. I think on Goodreads I gave this a 4.5 stars just because the ending was way too abrupt and I needed more of Olivia and Ridley, and I was very sad that it was over. But this book is beautiful, and it has some of the most incredible side characters I have ever read. We have Uncle Bob, who was a slave on this plantation, but once the Civil War ended, he continued to work on the farm. I think he's an overseer of all the horse-related things, and he was just one of the best characters I've ever read as well. Such a strong man of faith and just such a beautiful person. Oh my goodness, I loved him so much. And seeing him interact with Ridley and really take him on, and Ridley's respect for this man was just beautiful. I also really appreciate how strong Olivia was in her convictions, and even though she grew up in the South and the South is really all she knew, she never wavered in her stance against slavery and against oppression, and she was just such a beautiful character. I love this book so much, and I plan on reading the second book in this series in February. But this book was incredible. I would highly recommend if you like anything Civil War era. It is quite long, but it's very, very character driven. And I feel like once you fall in love with these characters, there's no going back. You're not going to be able to put this book down. And then the last prompt for the Read in the New Year readathon was to save money, read a book that you didn't pay for. And neither of these books were ones I paid for. These were both gifts. I'm glad I managed to fulfill each prompt. It was a really fun readathon, and thanks again Holly and Oshina for hosting it. I'm also participating in Oshina's Christian Romance Reading Challenge, and the prompt for January was to read a past favorite, and I counted To Whisper Her Name as my past favorite. So Christian romance, it was perfect for that prompt. And I'm also participating in Chantel's Read Your Bookshelf Challenge, and for that, it was a book that has the or in the title. I'm pretty sure it was actually supposed to be the first word in the title, but when I first read that challenge, I just thought it just has to be in the title. It doesn't matter if it's the first word or not. So I ended up counting Set the Stars Alight for that prompt. It has the word the in the title, it's just not the first word. But either way, this is what I counted. All right, so now going over the rest of the books that I read in January. The first one here is Wings of the Wind by Connie Lynn Cassette, and this is the third book in the Out from Egypt trilogy. And this series is a biblical fiction series. It's set around the time of the Exodus. Only in this book, we are now with the Israelites as they're wandering through the wilderness and fighting the Canaanites. And so in this book, our main character is a Canaanite woman who sneaks onto the battlefield with the Hebrews in order to avenge her family because her father and brothers were killed by the Hebrews. And so she disguises herself as a man and goes onto this battlefield. She ends up injured and rescued by a Hebrew man, Tobiah, and the story kind of goes from there. I don't want to say much else, but this story is a story of redemption and God's unending grace and mercy, and it's a beautiful story. The romance was also very, very sweet, and I really enjoyed my reread with this book. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. It's definitely not my favorite in the trilogy. I would say the first book is my favorite, but this one is a close second. I truly loved the characters in this book, and I would recommend all of Connie Lynn Cassette's books. She is an amazing author. Next up, we have Martin Chuzzlewit by Charles Dickens. This one I started in December and I finished it in January. And oh Lord, this I ended up giving 3 stars. It was okay. It was funny at times. It had really interesting characters, but Dickens, he frustrates me. Now, I haven't read a lot of his books that are typically people's favorites, like his more popular works. I haven't read Great Expectations or A Tale of Two Cities or Dombey and Son or Our Mutual Friend, like the really big ones that people seem to adore. And I'm reading his books in order of publication, so I'm not quite there yet, but this book really, really frustrated me because I got attached to some of the characters. And then I almost felt like I was betraying them by wanting to chuck this book out the window because I was so bored. I've noticed this in the other Dickens books I've read, where it's like there are so many scenes that have no role to play in moving the plot forward. Like they're the most pointless scenes And besides adding humor and introducing characters that honestly don't matter that much to the story, there's really no point. And I guess it comes with the fact that his works were serialized, which I can understand, and maybe I shouldn't be trying to read his books so fast and I guess pace myself more. But I was just really bored, really frustrated. And it's funny because this book was actually one I found at a thrift store, and so there are notes in it from whoever had this book before me, and there's this huge section where the notes just stop. So the person who had it before me took a lot of notes and underlined and annotated the first like third of the book, and then a huge chunk there was nothing. It's like they were probably bored out of their mind as well, and then towards the end they were annotating again. So that was really funny to see. But yeah, it took like 200 pages for the main plot point that I knew happened in this book to actually happen, where our main character Martin ends up leaving England. That took forever, and then once he was there, I just lost interest. It got so boring. One of the characters in this book, Tom Pinch, is one of the sweetest characters I have ever read in any book. He just melted my heart. I just wanted to give him a hug. Like he needs the biggest hug. He deserves the biggest hug. And yeah, a lot of the characters were fun. Dickens as a person, I feel like would have been so fun to sit down to coffee with. I feel like we would have had a good time, but this book just, like there wasn't much of a plot. But yeah, I gave it 3 stars. I still enjoy Dickens' writing style, and I am in no way uninterested in reading the rest of his books. I definitely want to read everything he's written. Next up, we have another book that I gave 3 stars, and I'm really, really sad because I thought that this would be a 5-star read. I honestly thought that I would adore it. And that is My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier. So I seem to be in the minority because I really loved Jamaica Inn and Frenchman's Creek, and I've noticed a lot of people don't like those ones as much and seem to prefer My Cousin Rachel and Rebecca. And Rebecca I also gave 3 stars. I don't know what it is about these 2 books, but they just didn't wow me the way that I was hoping. Now, I am a sucker for beautiful writing, and I've said it many times, I love atmospheric writing, and I don't mind a slow-moving plot. And so the writing in this book I loved, and the plot line was okay. Like, I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the ending, but I really, really did not like the main character and the fact that it's first person, and so everything in this book is from his perspective. For this book, I'm just gonna read the back. It's short, and I think it describes the book very, very well, and it says, orphaned at an early age, Philip Ashley is raised by his benevolent cousin Ambrose. Resolutely single, Ambrose is delighted to make Philip his heir, safe in the knowledge that he will treasure his beautiful Cornish estate. But Philip's world is shattered when Ambrose sets off on a trip to Florence. There he falls in love and marries, and then suddenly dies in suspicious circumstances. Before long, the new widow, Philip's cousin Rachel, arrives in England. Despite himself, Philip is drawn to the beautiful, mysterious woman, but could she be Ambrose's killer? And so I thought that the book was intriguing, the concept was intriguing, and I wanted to keep reading, but I just couldn't stand Philip. I could not stand him as a character. He was so whiny and immature, and I just kind of like would dread picking the book back up because I just couldn't stand his perspective. I couldn't stand that the book was written from his perspective and in first person. I'm sorry to everyone who loved this book, but it was not for me at all, and I'm really sad about that. But I do love Daphne du Maurier's writing style. I adored Jamaica Inn, I adored Frenchman's Creek, but this one just wasn't for me. I also read this for the England prompt for the Around the World in 80 Days readathon, so I have officially checked off the first country on the list. Next up is one of my new favorite fantasy books that I have ever read. I adored this book so much, and that is The Sword of Kaigan by M.L. Wong. I don't annotate books, but I just couldn't help myself with this one. Oh my goodness. It honestly blows my mind that this was self-published, and it deserves so much more love than it's gotten. This is one of the few books that has made me sob. So this book basically features elemental magic. So it's magic that has to do with air, fire, water, etc. And so we have 2 main characters. We have Mamoru, who is a young teenage boy, and his mom, Misaki, is the other main perspective in this book. And they are of this warrior family, and their magic has to do with water. And so they're able to create swords out of ice and things like that. And it's just so, so cool. And what I loved about this book is that Misaki, we really get into the heart of motherhood and what it means to be a mother. And I just wasn't expecting that from a fantasy book. It was just so much deeper and more emotionally charged than I was expecting. And so what happens is Mamoru is on his way to school, and this new student comes, and he's from outside of the village that Mamoru grew up in, and he really starts to challenge what Mamoru has been taught in school, especially about Kaigen's history. And things start to happen that just seem very suspicious, and Mamoru starts to realize that a lot of what he was taught is not accurate. And so this book really delves into propaganda and politics in this world and the different, I guess, countries and empires in this world, and it's just incredible, just amazing. My absolute favorite character is Misaki, Mamoru's mother. She is an incredible character. Her character arc is one of the best that I have ever read in any book. She's incredible, and the perspective of a mother was so beautiful to read from. I ended up giving this book 4.5 stars. The reason I knocked off half a star is just because of the ending. There were certain things that I didn't like, but I can't really say what those are without spoiling the book. But I buddy read this with Chrissy and Tiffany, and I'll leave their channels linked below, and we all adored this book. I think it made all of us very emotional. It was a little difficult to get into just because the second chapter, I'm pretty sure, is very info dumpy on the history of the world. But once you get past it, it's a breeze, and the writing style is very straightforward. It just captured my heart. I sobbed so much. I adored this book so much. All right, and then the last full-length novel that I read in January is The Golem and the Jinni, and this is by Helene Wecker, and this is a magical realism historical fiction set just around the turn of the 20th century. So it's from like 1899 to 1900. And this was a very interesting book. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I overall really enjoyed it. This book was so character driven, so the plot moved quite slowly, but I think listening to the audiobook really helped me to get through it. And I overall, like I said, really enjoyed it. But I'm gonna read the back just because I feel like it describes the book a lot better than I could. And so it says, Hava is a golem, a creature made of clay brought to life by a strange man who dabbles in dark Kabbalistic magic. When her master dies at sea on the voyage from Poland, she is unmoored and adrift as the ship arrives in New York Harbor. Ahmed is a jinni, a being of fire born in the ancient Syrian desert. Trapped in an old copper flask by a Bedouin wizard centuries ago, he is released accidentally by a tinsmith in Lower Manhattan. Struggling to make their way in this strange new place, the golem and the jinni try to fit in with their neighbors while masking their true natures. Surrounding them is a community of immigrants, the coffeehouse owner Mariam Fadul, a pillar of wisdom and support for her Syrian neighbors, the solitary ice cream maker Saleh, a damaged man cursed by tragedy, the kind and caring Rabbi Meir, and his beleaguered nephew Michael, whose sheltering house receives newly arrived Jewish men, the adventurous young socialite Sophia Winston, and the enigmatic Joseph Schall, a dangerous man driven by ferocious ambition and esoteric wisdom. Meeting by chance, the two creatures become unlikely friends whose tenuous attachment challenges their opposing natures, until the night a terrifying incident drives them back into their separate worlds. But a powerful threat will soon bring the golem and the jinni together again, threatening their existence and forcing them to make a fateful choice. I've been trying to be more mindful of what I'm reading when it comes to magic and just things like that are, I guess, darker, just because, you know, I am a Christian and it does matter to me what I read. And with this book, it definitely felt like it was close to my boundaries, but in a way, I think that it was a very important story just because the themes I felt were very important. It deals with immigration and that feeling of being an alien in a new land and just struggling to adapt to this new home. And it just has a lot of very interesting themes. And I think that the writing was beautiful and the characters were so fascinating, especially the golem and the jinni. They were both very fascinating characters. It was very unique, and I liked that it was magical realism because it felt like historical fiction with just a dash of magic, and I really liked that. And I'm amazed that this was the author's debut. It was beautifully written. I'm just seriously amazed. All right, and now I have a ton of picture books to go through because I read 16 picture books in January, and I'm not going to spend too much time talking about them, but I'll just share each of them and let you know what my thoughts were. I enjoyed the vast majority of them. There are 2 that I didn't enjoy as much, and the first one is Midnight Fair, and this is by Gideon Starer and illustrated by, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, but this book I ended up giving 2 stars. It was very weird. The entire picture book is actually just illustrations. There are no words and there's no obvious main character, so I just had no idea what was happening throughout the story. The art was okay, it was cute, but just not my kind of picture book. So just as an example, every single spread was just pictures and no words, just pictures. and it just didn't really make sense. So this just wasn't for me. And this next one I gave 3 stars to, and that is Cinders, A Chicken Cinderella by Jan Brett. This one was interesting. It is a retelling of Cinderella, but with chickens. The illustrations were sweet, but the story was just very bland, and I just wasn't charmed by it as much as I was hoping to be, so 3 stars. I thought it was okay. A very interesting retelling, but yeah, that is Cinders, A Chicken Cinderella. All right, this next one is Cozy by Jan Brett, and this one I gave 5 stars to. It is exactly what the title says. It is one of the coziest stories I have ever read. It has some of the most beautiful illustrations, and I personally really love winter, and I just love to read books that make me feel the season even more, and the illustrations in this book were just beautiful and so wintry, and all of the animals were just so beautifully drawn. I love the illustrations in this book. One thing I really love about this book, and Jan Brett has done this in other picture books as well, is the sides of the pages kind of give a clue to what the next page will hold and what the next page will have in terms of the story. And so you can see that the sides of each page, you have the main spread, you have the main illustration, but then you have a little sneak peek as to what the next page is going to portray. So yeah, like I said, this was a 5-star read. I absolutely loved it. I also read Cozy in Love, and this one I gave 4 stars to. It was really cute. I didn't love it as much as Cozy, but in this one, he falls in love with another musk ox, and it's really sweet and a simple story. And again, the illustrations are beautiful. Jan Brett, I know she wrote a few picture books that I read when I was in elementary school, and so I did reread one of them actually this month, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but I really, really love her illustration style, and I just felt so nostalgic reading these books. I do want to say that a lot of these picture books that I read, I picked up because of Gloria, and I'll leave her channel linked below. She reads a lot of picture books and always has amazing recommendations, so thank you so much, Gloria. You really got me on this picture book spree, and I'm so, so happy about that. All right, so the next book here is Winter Bees and Other Poems of the Cold by Joyce Sidman and Rick Allen. And this is a poetry collection that has to do with different animals, and it's set in the winter, which is really, really sweet. I gave this one 4 stars. Not all of the poems were ones that I personally enjoyed. I tend to be very picky with poetry, and I think I like very simplistic kind of nursery rhyme style poetry a lot more than, you know, rhymeless poetry, for example. I don't know what it is about it, but I just tend to prefer poetry that rhymes, I guess. But the illustrations were very, very beautiful in this book, and this one was one that I'm pretty sure Gloria had read, and so I picked it up at the library, and I'm very glad that I did. Next up, we have The House of Grass and Sky by Mary Lynn Ray and illustrated by E.B. Goodale. This book was so, so sweet and precious. This one is from the perspective of a house, and this house just wants to hear laughter again. It just wants to have people living in it, and it's this house's desire for life, basically, and it's just so beautiful. The illustrations were beautiful. Who would have thought that I would feel for a house? It melted my heart. I adored this book. I gave it 5 stars. I would highly recommend this picture book. I read 2 books that are part of a series. We have Goodbye Autumn, Hello Winter by Kennard Pack, and I think this one is probably in my top 3 of January. This was so beautiful. I love reading about the changes that come with seasonal changes. So going from winter to spring, going from fall to winter, going from spring to summer. I just love it so much. And the art style in this book is exactly what I love. It is right up my alley. It is one of my favorite art styles that I've ever seen. And this is definitely a book that I want to read it to my future kids. It's just absolutely stunning. And also by Kennard Pack, I also read Goodbye Winter, Hello Spring. And again, the exact same thoughts. I adored this book. I adored the illustrations so much, and it really, really encompassed the feeling of going from winter to spring and the hope of, you know, new growth, and just, oh, it was just so beautiful. I loved this book so much. I also checked out some picture books in ebook form, and the first one is Over and Under the Snow, and this one is a really, really cute one as well. I gave this one 4 stars. I loved the illustrations, and I'll have some pictures inserted, but yeah, this one was just beautiful. As well as Watercress. This one I also gave 4 stars, and this one is about a Chinese family who have this young girl, and she's very, very ungrateful with her lot in life, and it's kind of her growth, and it was, again, a very beautiful story. Then Up in the Garden and Down in the Dirt. This one was also really fun and I gave it 4 stars as well. This one is about gardens and what goes on in the dirt and then the perspective of the people gardening. And then the last ebook was Hello Lighthouse, and this was my favorite out of all 4 ebook checkouts, and this one I gave 5 stars. Oh my goodness, this one just melted my heart. It is about a man who lives in a lighthouse and his time with his wife and then the child that they eventually have, and it's such a beautiful story. I adored this one. All right, so we have 4 more picture books. Next up, we have The Three Billy Goats Gruff, and this is retold by Mac Barnett and illustrated by John Klassen. This one was just funny. It was so nonsensical and hilarious, and the illustrations are really silly, but it was really, really fun to read, and I did really like The Three Billy Goats Gruff as a kid, so I had never read this particular retelling of that story, and I really, really enjoyed it. Another 4 stars, we have Winter Dance by Marion Dane Bauer and illustrated by Richard Jones. Another really sweet wintry story with beautiful illustrations and one of my favorite animals. I love foxes so much, and I just love woodland animals, so I love when picture books feature forests and all these woodland animals. Just melts my heart so much, and I really, really did enjoy the illustrations in this one as well as the story. This next book is another 4-star picture book, and I actually read this in elementary school, and when I saw it at the library, just the nostalgia that I felt, it was just so beautiful, and that is The Mitten by Jan Brett, and oh my goodness, this book. I vividly remember reading this book on the floor in the library at my elementary school as a kid. I adored it so much, and it's like the cozy books where the sides of the pages have a clue as to what's going to happen on the next page. And I just loved this illustration style, and I'm pretty sure this one is a retelling of a Ukrainian folk tale. The illustrations were beautiful. I just felt so nostalgic reading it, and I'm just so glad that I picked this up. It was so precious. All right, and the very last picture book that I read in January is also my favorite picture book from January, and that is Lights on Wonder Rock by David Litchfield. This book was so cute. Oh my goodness. It's about this young girl who meets an alien. She sees this UFO and meets this alien. And then as she's growing up, she doesn't see him ever again. And so she keeps going to this rock to try to see if the UFO is going to come back. And she's growing up and she becomes a mother and she's still looking. She becomes a grandmother and she's still looking. And it's just such a beautiful story. And I don't think I have read a book with more vivid illustrations. The colors were so beautiful. It truly amazed me, and I adored this book. I adored every second that I spent reading it. 5 big stars, and I couldn't get enough of it. Okay, I think the camera angle's probably a bit different, but my phone died right when I stopped talking about the last picture book, which, best timing. My heart nearly stopped. I had no idea when it had stopped, and I was super scared that I would have to refilm this entire video, but thankfully I don't. But anyways, so those are all the books that I read in January. I am glad that I ended up reading quite a bit considering how busy it's been. I'm overall very happy. I just struggled a little bit here and there, especially because of my reading slump, but hopefully February will be a better month. Do let me know in the comments if you have read any of these books and what your thoughts were. I'd love to continue discussing these books in the comments below. But that's it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye.